Have you ever played a game that gave you drips of the truth hidden in plain sight, yet obscured by the walls of the reality tunnel built around you by the society, education, and environmental systems you were developed in? Some people knock down those walls through text, some through meditation, others through substances like LSD and psilocybin. For me, those walls were knocked down through a video game series, Assassin's Creed 2. The moments that hooked me into the game loop were when the game offered me secrets, deep lore, hidden puzzles, and layers that weren't required to finish the story, but existed to ground and enrich the narrative context. Every few hours, between all of the stabbing,
Stab you! Stab you! Stab you!
I'd come across a glyph etched into the world. Subtle, hidden. Climbing into this esoteric glyph unlocked a strange back door into the simulation within the simulation. It was always some sort of logic puzzle, sometimes a cryptic cipher, sometimes an image-matching sequence. Each time solving it revealed a new fragment of a historical conspiracy, tying real-world events, widely known and obscure alike, into the game's universe. There were even more hidden messages within each of these puzzles, giving even more insight into real-world conspiracies. But the best part? After each puzzle, you'd get a flash of video, literally a fraction of a second. Just a blink. Those few frames sustained my drive. Solve all of the glyphs and you uncover the whole message. Fragmented memories from a fragmented mind.
My mind is gone.
The previous player who went mad inside of this simulation machine that you are now subjected to.
Oh my God.
Now, one of the biggest complaints about open world games today, especially Ubisoft games, and especially the Assassin's Creed series, is how repetitive they've become. And that's a fair criticism. The loops can get redundant, the missions blur together, but for me in AC2 and Brotherhood, the grind was worth it. Not for the XP, not for the trophies, and not for the thrill of the kill, but for what it was all supposed to mean. I was in pursuit of what the game called the truth.
Adam, I have it.
Eve,
Look out! Wow.
was that what I think it was?
And that's what I was playing for. The aesthetic of discovering the esoteric and the secrets of the sublime. But in later games, they killed this mechanic completely, upending my personal aesthetic drive as an explorer. In the previous episode, I talked about Ubisoft developer Jason Vandenberg and his keynote at the East Coast Game Conference, Acting Like Players. I actually met Vandenberg in the hallway after that keynote and asked him why the later games in the series dropped my favorite part, those esoteric puzzles that revealed truths about the real world we inhabit. Much to my dismay, he told me that after looking at the player data, only a small fraction of our players actually engage with that mechanic. That kind of content takes a lot of work for only a very small percentage of players to engage with, and that really bummed me out. But he was right. Even from my own experience from talking with other fans of the game, most players skipped these optional glyph puzzles. They had no idea what I was talking about. They found these puzzles annoying and felt like they really got in the way of core gameplay. Stabbing.
Stab you!
But to me, that was the heart beating under the hood of the whole thing. And in the years since, I've come to understand that when a project's scope needs to be cut, the business number crunchers at the top, who don't understand or appreciate player ecology, look for the smallest numbers to cut, thinking it will have the smallest effect. But in doing so, often guts the very mechanics that make the work meaningful. This kind of fallacy is known as the doorman fallacy. I won't get into that here, but I'll link a video that explains it better than I can. Now this stuck with me, and I suspect it stuck with Vandenberg too, as his later talks dig into these kinds of ideas. In the previous episode, I showed this symbol without really explaining it. It comes from self-determination theory, a framework that becomes central to Vandenberg's approach to game design later in his series, and it lays out 3 things people need to thrive and be engaged: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. This symbol comes from a diagram and a series of essays by Harold Josh outlining what happens when one of these things is missing. Over the next few episodes, I'll be exploring these overlaps one by one before returning to the full picture later in the series. Think of it as a way of asking, what keeps us playing? And that brings me back to those players like myself who went deep into those glyph puzzles. Because yes, maybe only a few players go deep, but those are one-of-a-kind superfans. The lore hunter, the puzzle solver, the ones who keep putting logs on the fire, keeping the spirit of the game alive. They make the wikis, they make the
game theory
videos. They carry the mythos, and even if most players never touch that content, they feel its existence in the atmosphere and the world building of the game. It's in the air, earth, and water of these communities, giving everything real texture. Games, like communities, need both. The ones who go deep, and the ones who just roll through. The ones who design the rituals, and the ones who show up for the party. And when it works right, everybody eats. Why I continue. MDA theory. Mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, or what am I supposed to do here? This framework is well known in game design circles. It's based on a relatively short and accessible paper by Robin Hunicke, Mark LeBlanc, and Robert Zubek out of Northwestern University. A quick read, and I highly recommend it. MDA is a framework for breaking down how a game works into its essential elements. Games facilitate a conversation between designer and player participant. MDA explains how both sides of that conversation connect and communicate, making it a tool not just for games, but for workplaces, relationships, and life itself. It's also an easy tool for explaining why an experience starts to suck. Mechanics are the components of a game. The raw rules, the actions you can take, the buttons you can press, the territory you can move within, the powers that constrain you, and the powers that free you. Some examples: pop bubble, jump over, open door, schedule meeting, solve puzzle, shuffle deck, flip burger, submit ticket, fire laser, kick ball, roll objects into a ball, convince board of directors not to cut the team's budget, balance cash flow, or reduce headcount. Now, in a finite game, a game with a defined end, mechanisms rely on other mechanisms, parameters, or constraints to function. For example, how many bubbles are there to pop? How high can I jump? Can I push or can I pull? What does this symbol mean? How long until the burger's cooked? How many points should I make this ticket worth? What color is this laser? Is the ball firm, padded, or malleable and rubbery? How long is this meeting? How big of an object can I roll up? What color should I make this slide to be most appealing to those deciding the future of my career? What projects can I track my time against? These are parameters a system designer must consider when they have an intent or goal for the players who will experience that system. Good designers understand how freedoms or restrictions of certain mechanisms affect the behavior of participants. The interplay between mechanisms available and the decisions a participant makes creates a dynamic. A change in the parameters of the mechanism creates a change in the behaviors of the participant. Increased jump height, the player explores more areas. Rotate a door's push bar from vertical to horizontal, fewer people run into the door. Add complexity to puzzle logic, the player feels more challenged. Upgrade the spatula, flip more burgers faster. Take on a large point task, clear other projects from the work week. Make a ball very boingy and soft on the foot, more people can kick it. Make the important slide red, it stands out and gets noticed by that boss. Provide no proper time tracking code in company software, people log hours to the wrong project, reducing visibility to managers. Make decisions that lose revenue, cash flow falls out of balance. Let cash flow fall out of balance, reduce cost, reduce headcount. At every moment, our mind and body are processing inputs. Our mind then responds with decisions about what we should do next. Some of this is biomechanical, neurochemical reflexes that unconsciously respond to stimuli, but only some of it. Two people could be presented with the same platter of mechanisms, make the exact same decisions, and yet feel completely different about their outcome. That final element, where consciousness collides with consequences, what makes us more than wind-up bioalgorithmic automatons. It's where we've become more than the machines that train and learn. And that element is aesthetic preference. So here's how mechanics and dynamics affect aesthetics. I can leap over a building, I feel powerful. I can smoothly walk through a door, I don't feel clumsy or foolish.
It's push.
I solved a challenging puzzle, I feel clever. I fed 5 buses filled with hungry anchovies, I feel accomplished. I didn't complete a heavily pointed task affecting my team's burn down rate, I feel like a burden. I kicked the ball really well and everybody cheered. I feel proud. I have no project code to accurately track my time. I feel unseen and undervalued. I have no means to connect my knowledge, competency, or wisdom to solving the problems I see. I feel powerless, aimless, and disengaged. As we grow and mature, we learn which systems carry which mechanisms, and we learn what feelings we can expect from ourselves as we experience the consequences of the decisions we make within that finite system. And this is known as heuristics, little mental shortcuts that we start to create as we encounter these patterns over and over again. And sometimes, in spite of the system you grow up in, the lessons from adults who try to school you, the bullies who burn you, the people who love you, you're still going to like and not like the things you like and don't like. There's an inherent reward and incentive structure known only to you. Your ghost in the shell whispering, your specific set of aesthetic triggers makes you unique from every other person you'll ever encounter. And when people talk about the things that make life worth living or the things that drive them to take another way out, those things are ultimately aesthetic experiences. Feelings like discovery and expression, challenge and leisure, wonder and sensation, fellowship and belonging, anxiety and dread, threat and desire. For me, the hidden glyph puzzles in Assassin's Creed 2 were a mechanic that kept me engaged. While they weren't necessary to finish the game, their very existence created a special dynamic between me and the game and the complexity of the world history we're all a part of. They invited me to stop, search, and decode. That mechanic changed the whole way I played, because it promised a different aesthetic: discovery, conspiracy, and wonder. And when that mechanic disappeared in later games, my dynamic with the series shifted. I still played, but my motivation was different. In Black Flag, for example, I found joy in the aesthetic of piracy, in chasing sea shanties on uninhabited islands, and the way that the companion app integrated directly with the video game, giving me an additional level of immersion with the game. Great mechanics, great dynamics, great aesthetics. But none of them scratched for the explorer within me that same itch as those glyph puzzles and historical conspiracy revelations. When the system no longer gave me the aesthetics I felt set up for, I kept playing for a while, hoping for that same charge of discovery, but I never came back. To me, the series didn't just become disappointing. It had become irrelevant to the way that I discovered I really wanted to play. The game quite literally played with my reality. But remember what Vandenberg said? That kind of content takes a lot of work for only a very small percentage of players to engage with. My desired style of engagement no longer mattered in Ubisoft's world. The business chose to maximize efforts in areas that got bigger numbers, easier to obtain engagement loops, watering down the experience of the series to optimize for catching a wider audience. That's the aesthetic drive of today's business structures within late-stage capitalism, and it's working out so well for everything.
So what's it good for?
Okay, so why am I telling you all of this? In any design system, whether a workplace, a relationship, or a community, when the advertised mechanics no longer generate the same aesthetics it once promised, the player doesn't just lose interest, they can lose a sense of competency in the personal, social, or environmental world around them. They might start feeling like their choices don't actually matter, so a change in thought pattern might occur. And this is where Hirschman's frame of exit, voice, and loyalty comes back into play. Because what keeps people from exiting a system is often trust. That the loyalty they've invested into a mechanism will be honored with the expected aesthetic experience, that their voice will be heard and replied to. Voice and loyalty are two of the core mechanisms that hold trust together. And if they're absent, the system can't sustain trust. And when trust erodes, so does competency. And when competency erodes, what's left is the feeling of being ineffective inside of the very system you once loved. Now, as I said earlier, there's an unspoken agreement between the designer and the participant. The dynamic feedback between them is a conversation carried through time and space. Add a restrictor mechanic, and you directly affect the aesthetics, the feelings that emerge. With the right intentions behind it, this can be a good thing to subvert expectations, but without consent, before or after the fact, trust in the relationship comes into question. So to regain a feeling of competency, exit, voice, and loyalty are presented as mechanisms no different from the game mechanics of a video game. The choice one makes between these mechanisms depends on the prioritization among other aesthetic desires that could be in conflict with one another. How one prioritizes those aesthetic drives determines which mechanisms they will engage in. Check out this podcast called Hidden Brain by Shankar Vedantam about value systems.
Emily, most of us imagine that if there's a choice we want to make or a change we want to initiate, we can simply decide to do it and then we will carry through. Your study of the brain suggests that there's more to this process. In particular, a network known as the value system gets involved whenever we face a decision. What is this value system?
The value system is a constellation of brain regions that handle our choices, the choices that we're making consciously between, drinking a milkshake or not drinking a milkshake, between, whether we're going to go out on a date with somebody or stay home and deal with our emails. And the value system calculates these choices in what neuroscientists call a value calculation.
So in some ways it's doing a sort of cost-benefit analysis?
Yeah, basically, for each of our choices, it's identifying what are the different things that we're choosing between. It's assigning a subjective value to each of those different choices that depends on our current context, our past experiences, our future goals. And then based on that subjective value, that subjective reward that it's anticipating from each of the choices, it chooses the one that it thinks is going to be the best for me right here, right now. And then it is connected to other brain systems that take action that's relevant to that choice.
Those aesthetic desires could be a desire to see a company improve the treatment of your fellow workers, or a desire to just survive at the job to maintain your wage to afford to feed yourself and your family, or a desire to get the fuck off of a ship with a toxic management environment, desperately in need of a mutiny, but explicitly designed with mechanisms that prevent such things from happening. And how do those mechanisms work, you might ask? By controlling the opposition with design mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. Create mechanisms that channel a group's aesthetic drives into powering the mechanisms that maintain the systems of profit and gain for those in power. You see this in the deterioration of political discourse in this world, from being a class consciousness battle, where it's been heading for the past century, back into a nationalist, jingoistic, racial, and misogynistic battle. Ever since Zuck let grandma get on Facebook, the tribalism has gotten worse.
I actually have a couple games going on now with my grandparents.
Politics. Every major candidate has a page. Zuckerberg says there seem to be more Republicans on the site than Democrats.
Facebook discovered that they were able to affect real-world behavior and emotions without ever triggering the user's awareness. They are completely clueless.
The algorithms create these tribes, groups, guilds, parties through mechanistic systems that assign aesthetic assumptions about you and then troll the feed with aesthetically targeted bait, maximizing the effect of its money-generating advertising mechanism. Us humans are naturally inclined to be driven by the aesthetic of seeing a rival tribe destroyed or wrecked in a hyper-edited video, too wrapped up in a game loop mechanism to remember why you started playing in the first place. Are you playing for the love of the game, or are you literally playing for your life? I believe having an awareness of the dynamic between our own aesthetic mechanistic shortcuts is the first step in dismantling the hurdles we're encountering as a society, collectively working to evolve our socially conscious species into a better future.
I want to ask you, as someone who also works closely with men, helping them process their emotions and release trauma, what practices and approaches have you, found to be the most effective in helping men be transparent and emotionally open?
The most universal one, discovered by all of the world religions, is some form of mindfulness, that you see the games your mind plays. You have to observe it. It sounds so passive, but once you see it, you can't not see it. That you prefer the negative, or you prefer problem solving, or you prefer being antagonistic, scapegoating others. Once you recognize your patterns, you see they're everywhere.
When it comes to the presentation of certain aesthetic triggers employed by people in positions of power, we have to understand our own heuristics to avoid getting played. In the previous episode, I dropped references to Edward Bernays, featured in the Adam Curtis documentary Century of the Self.
100 years ago, a new theory about human nature was put forward by Sigmund Freud. He had discovered, he said, primitive sexual and aggressive forces hidden deep inside the minds of all human beings. Forces which, if not controlled, led individuals and societies to chaos and destruction. This series is about how those in power have used Freud's theories to try and control the dangerous crowd in an age of mass democracy. At the heart of the story is not just Sigmund Freud, but other members of the Freud family. This episode is about Freud's American nephew, Edward Bernays. Bernays is almost completely unknown today, but his influence on the 20th century was nearly as great as his uncle's.
And used his uncle's theories about the hidden desires within people's unconscious to create the foundation of what we now call public relations. Freud's work was all about the unconscious biases and desires humans have, things we don't normally talk about and have at the forefront of our minds. Bernays used that knowledge to play on our own aesthetic drives to trap our unconscious into buying cigarettes and Betty Crocker. Literally, the entire series of Mad Men is based on this.
But everybody else's tobacco's toasted.
No, everybody else's tobacco is poisonous. Lucky Strikes is toasted.
Nature has its own versions of aesthetic traps. Predator plants. The insect instinctually is aesthetically driven towards the sweet allure of colors and scents arising from the trap. That insect's mental shortcuts, its heuristics, tell it that this chemical aroma and these photon frequencies mean that there's an opportunity to engage in the mechanism of eating. But we know this is a trap. That natural aesthetic drive is driven by dopamine, a neurotransmitter present in all animals. This focus chemical gives us feel-good vibes when we're focused on a certain thing. That instinct, that aesthetic drive, is embedded into that insect through genetic traits, the building blocks for what becomes the mechanisms that trigger dopamine when it sees and smells the danger plant. Some aesthetic drives are instinctually installed like this, but some are installed by virtue of existing within an environment, like the first time you touched a red stove as a child, or play too close or too much with the small sandhill covered with red ants. But among socially driven creatures like ourselves, our aesthetic drives are also socially installed and reinforced through social mechanics, rules, and environments we encounter at various stages of growth from zygote to adult. So when my thoughts turn towards the mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics of our social structures and the way those social structures change between regions and social spheres and individual thought patterns, I think about the predator plant people that devise alluring systems that promise you a certain mechanism and aesthetic release while at the same time siphoning your life away while you're not watching. You only have to turn on the news every day right now to see the world is run by predator plant people. They've provided so many controlled outlets to make your voice feel like it's being heard. Engage with the mechanic of posting to Facebook, X Twitter, Threads, TikTok, and receive the dynamic feedback of likes, comments, reposts, responses, and getting all of the national news attention every day for some people.
Feed me all night long. That's right, boy!
Predator plant people operate on a need to experience the aesthetic of having all of your attention, expressing all of the certainty that you will have your aesthetic needs met if you just keep your mechanism focused right here. Take online trolling, for example. Many people think the word trolling derives from those mythical creatures that live under bridges, hassling travelers that cross over with riddles and confoundments. It makes sense to assume this origin, as it's fun to imagine these sorts of people as basement dwellers in need of a shower, sunlight, and grass touching. But the word trolling is actually derived from fishing. Trolling is where bait is slowly dragged behind a boat as a means of attracting fish over a large area. What might look to you as an opportunity to metaphorically eat a fascist through rhetorical combat on X Twitter is literally rage bait for the algorithmic angler looking to hook you into spending your precious time engaging with the lure on a digital hook and remaining on the platform that is now generating ad revenue from your time and eyeballs. Our Black Mirror portals have become optimized to activate our aesthetic drives. In terms of that unconscious level of awareness that Freud and Bernays focused on in their work, We're pretty toasted, y'all. The predator plant people have learned from those psychological frameworks and are rapidly evolving their aesthetic outputs for maximum engagement for your unconscious mechanisms. And the worst of them are angling to lure us all into returning to certain aesthetic realities that humanity has been growing out of. From feudalism through imperialism and nation conquest to today's late stages of capitalism. These predator plant people are adept at using the black mirror in your pocket or wall or desk to manufacture specific reality tunnels with certain aesthetic elements that look to offer opportunities for specific mechanisms to be engaged with that too many of us are really itching to engage with. These reality tunnels are particularly effective when they reinforce previously installed beliefs, confirmation bias, instinctual, environmental, or social, bolstering those mental shortcuts, those heuristics with rage bait, dog whistles, and virtue signals. All of these linguistic mechanisms are aesthetically optimized to give you a big old dump of dopamine. They have created a dynamic between the mechanisms of your conscious time on this plane and their aesthetic drive to regain and keep power and control. These predator plant people rely on some rather low effort bait too. And this is a double-edged sword. On one hand, this reliance on engagement, reactions, and rage bait being so low effort means that it can be relatively easy to tune your frequency a little bit higher once you realize it's ultimately your hand on the radio dial. But on the other hand, that rhythm is hitting something primal, and sure, you've heard the song before, but it's familiar and comfortable. And it feels good to get your thoughts out there, right? To let that fascist that you're talking to have a piece of your mind. But these things are trolling for your attention. You see a thing that has aesthetics similar to another thing with those aesthetics within your reality tunnel, and your mental shortcuts, your heuristic mechanisms, gives you certainty that you understand what this is that you're looking at and what dynamic to expect with it. Perhaps your integrity might even feel at risk if you don't rise to the challenge to dispel this misinformation, these lies. You will get some hits of dopamine when you engage with certain mechanisms in response to that. Language being one of the most powerful mechanisms that we have to engage with. One of the most powerful tools at our disposal within the shared realm of consciousness. This is why mindfulness is so important. Because it gives you some access and awareness of your unconscious self that they are exploiting. If you don't take the time to understand this, then you're vulnerable to not recognizing the troll when it passes by, and you get hooked by the anglers.
Glad I got that out of my system. Oh! I'm hooked, and that means...
Conclusion. So, how can you even learn to trust what you're seeing? Trust who's talking? Trust your own thoughts? Where are the boundaries of reality? How can I begin to reliably account for what I'm experiencing in this world? Is there any integrity to anything? Or is this all just an inherently unjust, corrupt, and deceitful world? Well, I believe that with the right kind of generous outlook on things, yes, we can get to the point where we trust ourselves and trust each other. My personally adopted path goes through another framework, one that gives us the ability to ask, how consensual is this relationship? Within myself, within my social circle, within my environment. And that's going to fit right here on this chart. And that's what we'll turn next, into Braving Trust.
One day I started seeing the static. The light outside the light we see. The forever hum that permeates it all.
We've got my dog back. Isn't she aesthetically wonderful? Scratch dog. Pet dog. Get licked by dog. Hug dog. And then get the experience, the aesthetic drive of all of that oxytocin. Oh, good dog. See y'all on the next one.